To me, the real test of a story's maturity is in its willingness to let its characters sit with complicated emotions. I've seen stories that cover darker and more graphic subject matter while lacking even a tenth of the depth and nuance of Avatar, and I could go on about all of the ways that standards for age ratings and maturity are ridiculous in the US, but that's a video for another day. Aang's failure at Ba Sing Se weighs heavily on him, and while his friends reassure him that he'll be able to redeem himself, the guilt and uncertainty stick with him and define his arc until the end of the series. It's not as simple as getting one pep talk and regaining all of his self-confidence. He has to continue to push himself until he feels worthy of the world's trust again. Similarly, while Zuko is technically coming off of his greatest success of the series so far, he realizes what the audience knew all along, that his quest to restore his honor was a fool's errand, and receiving Ozai's approval only made him feel emptier. For both of our main characters, honor isn't something that can be granted by others, it can only come from within. And as a final aside, the juxtaposition of Hakoda as a father who loves his kids unconditionally but had to leave for the greater good, and Ozai as just the worst guy, is chef's kiss. The fantasy empire world building in Avatar is brilliant. I mean, imagine how weird and dystopian it would be if kids were forced to swear an oath of loyalty to their country every day in school. What were we talking about? Coming fresh off the Ba Sing Se storyline, it's easy to feel disengaged from an episode like The Headband, and while it's obviously not as climactic and intense as Crossroads of Destiny, it's immensely important for giving the audience a more holistic view of the Fire Nation. All of the Fire Nation characters we've met so far are either military personnel or fire sages, so getting to spend time with civilians helps us to understand how imperialism can also negatively impact citizens of the imperial power. And again, this isn't centrist both sidesing. The constant threat of military violence is orders of magnitude worse than moderate restrictions on self-expression. But one of the biggest lies of imperial nations is that citizenship confers freedom, which is only true if you use that freedom to serve the nation unquestioningly. It's a testament to the level of detail in Avatar that even after having watched every episode dozens of times, I can still notice new things, like Momo licking Appa's tongue to foreshadow the purple berries. It would be easy to point at the Painted Lady and level accusations of overly simplistic moral messaging, and to that I would first say, weird that you're upset about anti-pollution messages, maybe chill out a bit? But after rightfully shaming you, I would argue that it actually goes much deeper than simple environmentalism. We know from Zuko's story that the Fire Nation only values human life insofar as it can be used to fuel the war machine. A platoon of new recruits can be sacrificed to secure a military victory, and a small fishing village can be left destitute to increase metal production. So what ultimately differentiates our heroes from our villains is that their value of human life isn't utilitarian. It comes from genuine love and concern for all people, even ostensible enemies. This transforms the message of the episode from pollution bad to imperialistic mindsets inevitably lead to senseless destruction, so we should restructure society around taking care of people and the planet. And the minor conflict between Sokka's pragmatism and Katara's compassion adds an extra layer to highlight how the personalities in Team Avatar balance and bring out the best in each other. A common issue for action series with ensemble casts is that over time, characters that were once essential parts of the team lose relevance because their power growth can't keep up with the remainder of the main cast. And different stories handle, or don't handle, this problem in different ways, but what Avatar does is reframe our understanding of what makes the characters important to the team. Sokka's character arc in Avatar has been almost exclusively focused on humbling him. He's become gradually less and less relevant in fights, and even though he has a lot of practical knowledge, it's only natural he'd start to feel like a burden. So with his insecurity about his ability to contribute at an all-time high, you'd think it was the perfect opportunity for him to seek out a way to get stronger. But the thing is, Master Piandao doesn't actually teach Sokka much of anything, at least not about swordplay. What he helps Sokka to do is understand where his real strengths lie and how to foster them more effectively. And what I really love about this decision is that by the end of the episode, Sokka really isn't any stronger than he was at the beginning. Sure, he got a cool weapon upgrade, but he's still definitively the weakest fighter in the gang, just with a better understanding of how he can still contribute. You probably don't need me to tell you that The Beach is a near-perfect episode. It's got great action with Sparky Sparky Boom Man, excellent character development for Zuko and Team Azula, and yet another example of the writers forgetting that Toph is blind.
It's your tattoos I'm worried about. What if someone sees you?
But it's undoubtedly the character work on Ember Island that endears this episode to so many, so let's dig into that. Taking the time out of your story to humanize your villains can have substantial benefits, and it works so well in The Beach because it starts to really put stress on the already established dynamics in the group. Ty Lee being in a position of superiority to Azula, even for something as minor as romantic attention, is key in her eventually gaining the confidence to betray her. And May never had the same level of deference to Azula as Ty Lee, but by understanding Zuko better, she finally had something she was willing to fight for on her own. You could even argue that this is the true beginning of Azula's unraveling, her insecurity over not being included in the war meeting manifesting as a desire for dominance in the volleyball game and at the party. As a One Piece fan, I'm contractually obligated to love flashback episodes, so it's incredibly convenient for me that the Avatar and the Fire Lord is already my favorite episode. But what separates a good flashback from a glorified exposition dump is its ability to invest the audience in the characters outside of the main story. Roku and Sozin's relationship is a tragic tale of best friends, or boyfriends if Nickelodeon weren't cowards, becoming bitter enemies, but what I find impressive is how well established Sozin's narcissism is with just a few subtle moments. There's the moment when Roku is revealed as Avatar, and everyone at the party bows with the exception of Sozin, who only kneels, and then when Roku returns from his Avatar journey, Sozin implies that Roku ought to bow to him, but he is allowing Roku to treat him as an equal. Sozin's lack of respect for the position of Avatar, combined with the internal symbolism of letting Roku fall during their sparring match, makes it no surprise that Sozin abandoned Roku in the end. And as for Roku, we don't really learn anything new about his personality, but getting to see a fully realized Avatar in action isn't something I would ever turn down. I especially love the weight and energy behind this shot of him fighting the volcano. But what really makes this episode for me is that it's not just about the Avatar and the Fire Lord, it's also about the Avatar and the Fire Lord. Aang and Zuko inherited the mistakes of their predecessors, and it's only by forging a genuine equal friendship that they can begin to undo all of the pain of the past 100 years. Toph's driving motivation in Avatar is proving to herself that she is strong, or more specifically, proving to her parents that she isn't helpless. In The Runaway, her running scams with Aang and Sokka is explicitly framed as rebellion against her parents, and I think it's incredibly telling that the primary basis of her scams is tricking others into believing she's vulnerable as if to punish them for underestimating her. And when Katara expresses worry about the danger of the scams, that just makes Toph double down because she still perceives all concern for her well-being as pity, so Katara is just another parent babying her. But what's painfully obvious to me is that Toph recklessly throwing herself into danger isn't proof of her confidence, but of deep insecurity. While the audience in Team Avatar respect her strength, she hasn't yet let go of her bitterness over her parents' coddling, so her greatest moments of strength in this episode are when she lets herself be vulnerable with Katara and Sokka. Dropping her bravado to admit that she misses her parents took way more courage than any fight she's been in, and she's rewarded for her bravery with love and support from her friends. Body horror in my 2007 children's fantasy cartoon? It's more likely than you'd think. Hama exists as a cautionary tale about the cycle of violence. After suffering deeply at the hands of the Fire Nation, she was right to want revenge, and her desperate circumstances led to her discovery of a power that would have been invaluable for winning the war. The tragedy of her story, however, is that instead of fighting against those who were responsible for her trauma, she lashed out against people who weren't able to defend themselves. But it's not lost on me that in the framing of this episode as a ghost story, a traumatized victim of imperialism is placed in the role of the monster. So while I'm sympathetic to Hama, the narrative of the Puppet Master broadly is not. Really, the Puppet Master stands out as weirdly moralistic for Avatar, especially considering how characters like Jet, Iroh, Zuko, and even Azula to an extent are never treated as fully beyond redemption. Hama was wrong to attack civilians, of course, but framing her as grotesque and corrupting isn't the choice that I would have made. Bloodbending is really creepy though. The animators deserve some kind of award for all of the nightmares they probably caused. If I had a nickel for every time there was an incredibly goofy but also deeply introspective episode of Avatar before a major climax of the series, I would have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. Nightmares and Daydreams is, in my opinion, the funniest episode of Avatar, and while the comedy itself is enough to recommend the episode, it's the insight that Aang's nervous breakdown gives into his mental state that really seals the deal. Because Aang is a deceptively stoic character. He's a fun-loving kid and he presents himself with a carefree persona, but it's made clear over and over again that he acts this way to avoid burdening others with his anxiety. So with what he believes is the final battle upon him, he's too overwhelmed to be able to conceal his emotions, which manifests as the insane fever dreams that we get to enjoy. We also get to see all of the seeds of Zuko's redemption finally begin to sprout as he contends with what it actually means to be accepted as Fire Nation royalty. Standing Appa isn't real, he can't hurt you. The closer we get to the end of the series, the harder it is to keep these videos brief, and even in 2 parts, Day of the Black Sun has a lot to cover, so let's get moving. In a lot of ways, the Eclipse invasion is more climactic than Sozin's Comet. All of the returning characters give the story up to this point an air of real consequence, with all of the bonds Team Avatar has formed during their journey playing some role in the battle ahead. From the Swampbenders and the Earth Rumble 6 competitors to the Mechanist and the Freedom Fighters, everyone you could reasonably expect to return does, and it feels completely natural in spite of Haru's mustache. It also acts as a culmination of Sokka and Aang's character arcs, with Sokka getting to demonstrate his growth as a leader and Aang re-accepting his role as Avatar and revealing his survival to the world. Also, Appa gets to look incredibly handsome in the armor that Sokka made for him. With all of this going for the invasion force, even knowing that the Fire Nation is prepared for the attack isn't enough to dampen the feeling of hope that the eclipse offers. I don't fully remember what it was like watching it for the first time as a kid, but as an adult who knows the outcome, it still feels like the war might actually end here when I re-watch it. Sadly, with each successive roadblock, any hope the audience may have had wanes until we're forced to accept that, at least for today, victory is impossible. But faced with their greatest failure since Ba Sing Se, Team Avatar never gives in to despair, and their resolve to set things right is only strengthened. As they say, the comeback is always greater than the setback, and this final defeat will only make victory taste that much sweeter. This is your official content warning. Stay safe out there, everyone. Zuko's confrontation with Ozai gets its own video, and if you don't think it deserves it, I'm going to find you and steal your bones. The difficult thing about abuse is that when you're in a bad situation, you're so deprived of context for your experiences that you can convince yourself that you somehow deserved even the most horrible of treatment. And the psychological torment of trying to earn the affection of your abuser can lead to you engaging in harmful behavior of your own. Zuko's entire reason for existence during his banishment was capturing Aang so that his father would restore his honor, and he was willing to hurt as many people as it took to achieve that goal. But paradoxically, it was finally receiving Ozai's acceptance that led to Zuko realizing that he never truly wanted or needed it, and having him directly call out Ozai to his face for his cruelty is massively impactful and cathartic. And what I really appreciate about Zuko's speech is that even though he's a victim, he still takes responsibility and makes no excuses for his own part in perpetuating the suffering in the world. If he had wanted to distance himself from the Fire Nation and Ozai, I don't think anyone would have blamed him, but it speaks volumes to his growth that after everything Ozai put him through, he still takes it upon himself to set things right. As we reach the final chapters of the series, no character has grown and changed more than Zuko, but along with that growth comes a vast number of mistakes he made along the way. So while to the audience, Zuko finally joining Team Avatar feels incredibly natural and correct, to the established members of the gang, accepting Zuko is understandably controversial, with each of them having their own unique relationship to him. As the character with the least experience with Zuko, Toph is his biggest advocate. She only met him personally one time, and that was right on the heels of her conversation with Iroh about learning to trust people and accept support. To her, there isn't a good reason to reject his offer, even if he's still theoretically an enemy. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum, Katara has the most personal grudge against Zuko. She's the most compassionate member of Team Avatar, but by the same token, she's the most unforgiving to anyone who betrays her trust. Even though she eventually consents to him joining, she still needs a lot more proof that he's changed in order to fully accept him. Sokka has had more than his fair share of bad experiences with Zuko, but as a pragmatist, his primary objective is winning the war, and even if he doesn't trust Zuko, he decides it's better to have him as an ally for now. And Aang really shines in this episode, because while he's the most conflicted, I believe he's also the first to make the decision to truly accept Zuko. More than the rest of Team Avatar, he's seen Zuko at his best and his worst, so after learning about Roku's history with Sozin, he wants to believe more than anything that Zuko deserves a real chance at redemption. Knowing that Zuko regrets his past is enough for Aang to see that he really is a changed man, and he's willing to believe that it's not just lip service, but a genuine desire to restore balance. I'm gonna say it right here and now, Aang gets the coolest field trip. The other two have amazing character development and themes, but Aang's is the only one with dragons. What I find really remarkable about the Firebending Masters is that while Aang and Sifu Hotman have the same journey, they take away different lessons from the experience. In spite of the fact that Aang has always been destined to learn firebending, the story so far has framed it as the evil bending style. Almost all of the firebenders in the series are antagonists, and most of the ones that aren't have still used their bending to serve the Fire Nation's empire. So to Aang and the audience, up to this point, learning firebending was something that would inevitably lead to destruction, but in this episode, we learn that fire isn't something to be feared. Sifu Hotman,
stop calling me that!
Zuko has already internalized firebending as a part of himself, so his lesson this episode is about what being good really means to him. He made the choice to defect from the Fire Nation and join Team Avatar, but there's a difference between passively rejecting wrong and actively doing what's right. All of the qualities that made him a dangerous enemy to Aang are the same qualities that will enable him to actively shape the future for himself and the Fire Nation. And I know it would break continuity in a variety of ways, but I do really wish that after this episode, Zuko's fire had changed color. I mean, imagine how much cooler the final Agni Kai would have been with red and blue flames clashing. I should probably come clean about my most controversial Avatar opinion. I considered it to be a shonen battle anime, and I think you'd need to get incredibly pedantic in order to make any argument to the contrary. It bears all the aesthetic hallmarks of the genre with its blend of action, comedy, and fantasy adventure, but to me, the real defining quality of a shonen battle series is the moral imperative to be recklessly hopeful, and no episode embodies this ideal better than the Boiling Rock. When he realized the Fire Nation had played them during the Eclipse invasion, Sokka was faced with a difficult choice. Cut his losses and live to fight another day, or double down and try to salvage the plan. He chose the more dangerous option and deeply regrets his failure, so when placed in a nearly identical situation in the Boiling Rock, a lesser series would have him redeem himself by playing it safe and ensuring that Suki got out of prison. But instead, with the support of Zuko and Suki, Sokka decides to have hope in the face of despair, and he's rewarded for this choice by getting the chance to save Hakoda. And I just love this stuff. I want to inject this kind of radical optimism into my veins every chance I get. And if you think that's naive, well, what can I say, but that's rough, buddy. I feel more and more over time that Team Azula were underutilized in Book 3. Having more scenes of their social dynamics back in the Fire Nation would be on the short list of must-haves if I got to rewrite the series. But with that said, they do make the most out of their limited screen time. The Boiling Rock Part 2 is the first time we really see Azula on the back foot. Her main strength, even above her prodigious firebending, is her meticulous planning. In Ba Sing Se and the Day of Black Sun, she had perfectly calculated each move such that she won before the fight even started, so it's only natural that in such a chaotic event as the second escape attempt, she finally gets outmaneuvered. And it's not through a calculated strategy, but by genuine emotional connections. Mei choosing Zuko over Azula wasn't because she believed that Zuko would be able to protect her from the consequences, it was because she saw Zuko's desire to set things right in the world, and even if she didn't understand, she knew he deserved a chance. In the same way, once Ty Lee saw the cracks in the group about to break, she opted to save the person who'd shown her true friendship, even if it meant risking her own safety. And that's the one thing that Azula could never plan around, the idea that somebody would choose love over fear. Katara haters, keep scrolling. Or better yet, leave an angry comment and boost me in the algorithm. The Southern Raiders is Katara's best episode, and genuinely one of the most mature and thoughtful explorations of revenge I've ever seen. The choice is initially framed in pretty simplistic terms. Zuko believes that getting a chance at vengeance will give Katara closure, and Aang insists that only forgiveness can achieve that goal. And this is a quandary we've all seen dozens of times, so you would assume that when faced with the reality of revenge, somebody as compassionate as Katara would be horrified with herself and choose forgiveness. But instead, she chooses a secret third thing, to look this man in the face and tell him that he isn't even worth killing. In a society where the impetus is always put on the victim to be the bigger person, Avatar endorsing the idea that forgiveness should only be given to those who genuinely change their ways is incredibly powerful. Compassion is a great thing, but always remember that you don't owe your abusers anything, and kindness is best given to those who choose to be kind themselves. It is a truth universally acknowledged that recap episodes suck. They're an obvious ploy by animation studios to reuse existing assets and extend their budget, depriving the audience of actual content and wasting everybody's time. That is, unless you happen to be watching the Ember Island Players, which is not only a perfectly functional recap, but also one of the most memorable, quotable, and emotionally engaging episodes in the whole series. Something as ridiculously meta as having your characters watch a fictionalized version of their own fictional adventures shouldn't work as well as it does, but it's the perfect pre-finale opportunity to have them ruminate on all their past failures and come to terms with all their hopes and fears for the upcoming battle. But even without all that emotional nerd stuff, this episode is the source of almost all of my favorite quotes from the show. Avatar state yip yip, tear-bending, flying kick-a-pow, you know it was really unclear, the list goes on. There really isn't anything bad I could say about the Ember Island Players. It's peak Avatar in every sense of the term.
I release a sonic wave from my mouth. There, I got a pretty good look at you.
Fans of the show are always talking about how the Avatar movie is terrible, don't watch it, there is no movie in Ba Sing Se. But there is a movie, it's real, and it's incredible, and it's called Sozin's Comet. When you're writing a climactic finale and you want more than anything for the audience to stay engaged, it's important to remember a concept that I like to call the paradox of stakes, which is that a conflict that is personally important to the main characters will always feel more significant than a conflict with objectively higher stakes. A city getting destroyed feels like it should be important in some abstract sense, but the hero's childhood home getting destroyed actually gets us emotionally invested. And Avatar: The Last Airbender understands this paradox perfectly, with the large-scale military conflicts always being grounded with intimate personal stories about choices and emotions. We don't care about ending the war because we know that it's objectively bad for the world, we care because of how the war has affected Aang, Zuko, the rest of Team Avatar, and everybody else we've met along the way. Avatar: The Last Airbender places a lot of focus on the intersection of destiny and personal choice. In the series, destiny is not some fixed, inevitable thing that our characters passively wait for, it's something they actively shape with every decision they make. And no character embodies this concept better than Fire Lord Zuko. From the beginning, Zuko was always destined to become Fire Lord, but it was the path he took to achieve that end that defines him as a character, standing in direct contrast to the other contender for the throne, Azula. Azula perfectly embodies the might makes right mentality that has defined the royal family since Sozin. She's cunning and merciless, controlling her subjects through fear and believing completely in her own supremacy. Zuko wanted to follow that path, but when he wasn't able to live up to the cruelty that the Father Lord expected of him, he was cast out, ironically setting him on the path to become worthy of the throne. Through kindness, humility, and self-control, he was able to find true honor, and his willingness to sacrifice himself to save Katara is proof that he's surpassed his family in every way that matters. Because the kind of ruthlessness that Ozai and Azula exhibit inevitably leads to destruction. After being betrayed by Ty Lee and May, Azula became paranoid and isolated, seeing an enemy behind every corner and trusting no one. By contrast, Zuko is able to rely on his friends entirely. He knew that even if he couldn't block the lightning, Katara would immediately come to his aid, healing him and defeating Azula. By respecting his friends as equals and letting himself be vulnerable with them, he gained more authority than an iron fist could ever grant. So Zuko was destined to become Fire Lord not because of his birthright, but because he chose to bring about an era of love and peace. And my god, 15 years later, and the scene in Iroh's tent still has me crying like a baby every time. Aang's story in Book 3 is about the purpose of power. Having mastered or at least learned all 4 elements, it's time for him to face his final challenge, Phoenix King Ozai. And there's really no way around this. Ozai is as one-dimensional as they come. He's a mustache-twirling megalomaniac what wants to burn the world down, and that's it. There's no depth, no complex motivation, no tragic backstory to provide context for the way he is, but here's the thing, I think that's perfect. See, the biggest lie of any hierarchical system, be it imperialism, capitalism, or whatever else, is that the people on top deserve to be there. And giving any layers to Ozai beyond wanting power for its own sake is a betrayal of the fact that he's never earned anything for himself. He was born into the royal family, and he was presumably pampered and trained in absolute luxury by the best teachers that the Fire Nation had to offer. He didn't ascend to the throne by winning it from Iroh or proving his usefulness to Azulon. He staged a coup on his father and forged his final will and testament. As for Aang, sure, he was born as Avatar, but after emerging from the iceberg, he's had to fight to stay alive. He's scraped and struggled for every ounce of power he's gained, and he's become the best version of himself along the way. And that's what makes energy bending work for me. If you take away Aang's bending, he still has wisdom, compassion, determination, and understanding. His strength is immense, especially in the Avatar state, but it's entirely incidental to his ability to fulfill the true role of Avatar as spiritual advisor to the world. Take away Ozai's firebending, his ability to threaten violence, and you're left with a petulant child who would rather break his own toys than give somebody else a turn to play with them. Moreover, killing Ozai might have lionized him in the eyes of the Fire Nation. He would have been a martyr for the cause, somebody too dangerous to be left alive, but take his bending away and it lays bare the truth. There was never anything special about him. Now, whether you believe energy bending was sufficiently set up by the story is your business, but to me, it was the perfect karmic punishment for someone as philosophically empty and weak as Ozai. To paraphrase Katara, Aang spared Ozai not because he was too weak to kill him, but because he was strong enough to not have to, and I think that's pretty beautiful. I've had a hard time figuring out how to end my time here with a series like Avatar: The Last Airbender, so let's start at the beginning. I first watched Avatar on Nickelodeon in 2005, and I haven't ever really stopped watching it since. It stuck with me in every new phase of life I've found myself in, and I think that's interesting. Because there's a weird social pressure that you experience as you get older to put away things from your childhood. You can hold on to the nostalgia, but you have to say to yourself, sure, it was good for what it was, but it's time to move on to something smarter, more mature, less childish. And understandably, that doesn't sit well with people, so the natural defense is to say that actually, Avatar's incredibly mature and deep and dark and challenging, and while those things are true, I find myself less and less interested in saying them. Rather than be embarrassed of the childishness of Avatar, I've come to feel that it's actually its greatest virtue. See, the thing that I love about storytelling is that it's a vehicle by which we can express our values. It gives us the power to portray the world not just as it is, but as we hope to make it, and Avatar believes that the world can have suffering and fear and complexity, but in the same breath be unapologetically bright and colorful and joyful. I don't know at what point we decided that something like believing in the power of friendship was a sign that we shouldn't be taken seriously, but I'd much rather live in a world where we pursue joy together than in one where we accept loneliness, and if it's childish to think that, then I have no desire to be mature. To me, Avatar teaches us to look at all the darkness that exists in the world and not become jaded and cynical, but to fight against it with all the childlike whimsy we can muster. I want to thank everybody who's come along on this journey with me talking about one of my favorite stories. I hope that we've all gained something from the experience and that you'll join me in all of my future adventures, but now, as always, Avatar State Yip Yip.